Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
For recording purposes, today is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. It's 2 p.m. and this panel is number 18169, titled Journalists and AI, Friends or Foes? And the answer is yes. We'll get to that in a minute. Before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder's, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homes of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from the territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation brought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. One other thing I'd like to mention is that we want to make sure that you all get a chance to answer questions, and here's how we're going to handle the Q&A. We're going to reserve it until the end of the discussion, probably the last 20 minutes. We're going to use a note card system to receive questions from the audience. At any time in this session, all you have to do is raise your hand, request a note card and a pencil from one of our producers. They're the three ladies in the back. Please write legibly. If you're a student, please note that too, because we really want to note that you're a student. When you finish raising your hand, you hand it to the producer who's going to bring it up to me. And I urge everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point. That'll be helpful. And now I'm going to do a brief introduction for the panelists. If you want to read their full bios, you can find that online. We're going to start with the gentleman writer next to me, David Brown. He's a New Orleans-based author whose nonfiction work regularly appears in the New Yorker, New York Times, Wine Enthusiast, and Scientific American. He's the author of The Mission. It's a book that tells a true story of a group of scientists who spent 20 years convincing NASA to send the spaceship to Europa, that's Jupiter's ocean moon. His upcoming book, The Outside Cats, will explore the story of a team of scientists studying rapid sea level rise in Antarctica, and it includes memoirs of his own expeditions. He also rescues animals. Next to David is Jessica Herzberg. She's a seasoned broadcast news producer with 25 years of experience, currently working at the NBC News Health Unit. She produces stories for multiple NBC platforms, including Nightly News with Lester Holt, The Today Show, and NBC News Now. Jessica has previously worked at CBS, Fox News, and Fox Business Network. And more importantly, she has a daughter somewhere in the audience who's a freshman. If you would wave, oh, I see you, you're right over there. Hi, Jessica's daughter. Thanks for being here. And we have Jose Marichal. He's a professor of political science at California Lutheran University, specializing in the role of algorithms and AI in reconstructing social and political institutions. He's got a book coming out on the topic this year, and he's also written about the differences in how individuals engage in political discourse across social platforms. He is also a proud CU Boulder alum. Yes. And last but definitely not least is Carl Quintanilla. He's the principal anchor at CNBC, co-host of the Squawk on the Street and Squawk Alley, both broadcast live from the New York Stock Exchange. Since joining NBC Universal in 1999, he's covered a wide range of topics, including the Olympics, the 2004 U.S. presidential campaign, international military conflicts. He's won numerous awards, well-known journalism awards, Emmys, Edward R. Murrow Award, and a Peabody Award. He also holds a bachelor's degree from CU Boulder as well, another alum. And he's worked at such hometown papers as the Daily Camera and Westward. And most importantly, he has been a CWA alum since 1984.
Well, I should say, I came as a kid to CWA in 1984.
All right, well, he's been coming. They would have taken you then, Carl, if they knew how brilliant you were. Well, now we're going to have each of the panelists kick off with a brief speech, and we'll kick it off with Carl, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Candace. It's really fun to be here. I was looking at the lineup of panels that I'm on at least these 3 days, and this was really one of the ones that popped, so I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say. I think my general view at the moment is that for as much as we talk about AI and the influence that we know it's going to have in newsrooms, I don't feel like we're there yet. We're sort of, it's like we got the tsunami warning and we're sort of waiting for the waves to start approaching shore. It is, at least at NBC or CNBC, we can compare notes later, it's definitely not a top-down thing yet. They're not institutionalizing, it's not coming down in policies from HR, we're not getting trained collectively in these tools. It's definitely more of like individual pioneers within the newsroom. Like there's some producers who are anchors who will use ChatGPT, for example, if you're having a guest on the show in the morning. What should I ask the CEO of Exxon? Or things that might amplify what your existing responsibility. I think that's going to be one big stage, is when that gets sort of formalized across the newsroom. And then the other big wave will be when it gets into production, when it goes into the booth, the control room. When chyrons, those lower thirds that you see on your screen, don't need to be written by someone who is sitting there right now, listening to the show. You know, they hear what we're talking about, and they type something that then appears on the bottom of the screen. That'll get automated. That'll be one clear example that we're definitely moving forward. But we're not, like I say, it's not quite happening at scale yet. I think another part of the conversation that we probably should have is not just about newsrooms, but about PR and marketing and sales and advertising. I think the effects of AI on those industries arguably might be more dramatic than in journalism, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, great. Jessica?
Thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm happy to be here. I will echo a lot of what Carl says. I am based in the nightly newsroom. That's where I sit. And we are, to some extent, using AI currently. Primarily, we use a program called Otter AI, and it's a voice transcription service. So I think AI, when used correctly, really can save a lot of time for us to spend our time doing other tasks that really need to be done by humans. We used to do interviews and send them out for transcription for when we're gonna edit the piece and write the script. And now we use Otter. So I can literally have a live transcript created while we're doing the interview and clean it up later. And then obviously that helps save hours with regards to I don't have to sit down there and manually transcribe. I work for the health and medical unit. We actually just had a meeting the other day and we were talking about, are there ways that we can incorporate AI into what we do? We read a lot of studies and clinical trials, and that's what we base our coverage on. So we were discussing, could we put in a study or a clinical trial and ask back for the top 10 bullet points of it without all the medical jargon? Admittedly, I have not done that yet, but we all agreed that we thought that was a good idea. I think that we for ourselves and our unit aren't really using it for story generation ideas yet. I think that is being done across the industry. Personally, I just feel like there needs to be a lot of transparency. If you're reading an article online, you're reading a piece that was generated by AI, not just the idea, but the actual text that you're reading. I think that that should always be very clear that you're reading something that wasn't necessarily written by a human being. But I think the other thing I'll say is that as someone who's responsible for the content that's going out to a national audience, you know, accuracy is our primary concern. And there was a professor at Northwestern a few years ago who did like a quick audit. Microsoft used to have that program Bing, which I think was acquired by CPG. And he did a quick audit, and 47% of the responses that he got were inaccurate. So I think that everyone has to be really careful. You could be, even when you Google now, the top responses that you see on the left side are auto-generated responses. And if you click those links, they're not always very reputable sources. They're not always necessarily accurate. So things have come a long way, and they will continue to move at lightning speed, as we all know. But I think that you just have to be really careful about whether or not what you're reading is true, factual, and accurate. And right now, you need human beings in the newsroom because we need to be able to make calls and talk to people and make sure that we have our information correct.
David?
Thank you so much for having me here today. Is this thing working? Okay, great.
Is this thing on?
Yes. So I'll take the doomsday point of view on all this, and AI, friend or foe, I'm going to say mortal enemy. So I've been doing this for a while, and at this point in my career, I'm not too worried about AI taking my job because the things that I do tend to be nuanced. I tend to have to do an awful lot of interviews, and I have to find interesting things from the people I talk to and find other people, sort of correspond interviews with multiple people. And that kind of thing, I don't see ChatGPT making phone calls anytime soon. It might. Like that might be ChatGPT 5.2, and that'll be it. Then I will be looking for a job and wishing that I'd learned to repair transmissions when I was in high school. My background, I was a first-generation college student. I grew up in the trailer parks, and you didn't ascribe to be a writer one day. That just wasn't a job that was really on the horizon. You needed to be a little more practical than that, and I happened to fall into this job. Like, it worked out great for me. But the first several years of my career, I was writing the sorts of things that, look, I wasn't born like Shakespeare, right? You have to hone your voice, you have to cultivate your skill set. And those first few years in my career, the things that I wrote, they weren't great, but I was learning an awful lot, and they would be with me for the rest of my life. But those first 5 years could be written by ChatGPT probably in about 15 minutes. So I'm not really worried about me, but I am worried about the me who's just starting out today. If you went to an Ivy League school, you're going to be fine. Like you're never going to have to worry about this. But if you didn't come from that background, bad things are coming. And so it's hard for me to, in any way, smile and nod whenever I hear stories of, I don't know, the New York Times or the Washington Post bringing AI into the newsroom. How are ways that we can innovate and accelerate things? I would like to see them slow down if at all possible. I don't think that's happening. I mean, when I first started in this job, it was an adamant directive: do not Google your news stories. Like, don't just do your research with Google. Now, the idea of not using Google would be absurd. So 5 years from now, I might sit up here, if I'm invited back, and I would say, you know what, AI has been the best thing in the history of this business, and what have we been waiting on? But I am not optimistic about that.
Thank you. Jose?
Well, first of all, it's a real thrill to be at this conference. This is a very special conference. I was in your chairs 20 years ago, and so to be up here is really, really amazing. So, you know, first of all, it's hard to sort of sort out the hype from reality when you study this for a living. I'm not a journalist. I'm a political scientist, and so I study the impact of algorithms and AI on society in general. And so what I think I might be able to provide is like a big picture view. So let me start with hype. Reid Hoffman, Netflix CEO, he says, he's got a famous quote now, that AI is the steam engine of the mind. Right? So if you think about what was the steam engine. Sorry? Okay. So Reid Hoffman is the CEO of Netflix, and he has this famous quote. He says, AI is the steam engine of the mind. So, okay, so what he meant by that is that if you think about what impact the steam engine has. All right.
It's not you.
No, it's not. Good. As long, everybody, it's not means. Okay, how about now? Okay. All right, I'll tell you what, I'll start from scratch, okay? So I'm not a journalist. I am a political scientist. I study the effects of technology, algorithms, AI on society. So what I think I can provide this panel is a little bit of a bigger picture view. I think what we in academia, knowledge work, it's something similar to what's going to happen in all knowledge professions, journalism included. We all have to reckon with the impact that AI might have in the next few years. It's hard to disentangle the hype from the reality. And one of the famous quotes from the hype side is from Reid Hoffman, who's the CEO of Netflix. And he said, AI is the steam engine of the brain, right? So if you think about, I think it's the better said, AI is to the knowledge work what the steam engine was to manual labor, right? That could be overdoing it, but I do think that there's something to that. It's undoubtedly, AI can make you more efficient. As a professor in my work, it can help with editing, it can help with summarization, it can help with transcription. There's lots of ways I use it on a daily basis. I make little apps, little AI agent apps that help me in numerous ways all the time. The bigger question for everybody is not so much whether or not the technology is going to, I think when you said both, is AI friend or foe both? I think, yeah, of course, right. It's both. It can be helpful or it can be hurtful. We like to use big 10-cent words, that it's a socio-technical system, right? So the technology in and of itself doesn't dictate to what problems is AI going to be directed towards, right? Somebody has to make that decision. There's a human in the loop, as AI people say, right? Somebody is going to make the decision about what that gets used for. And the important thing is, who's going to get to make those decisions? Who's going to get to control which problems AI is the solution for, right? If it's, I want my company to be more efficient, and that means laying off half my workers, well, that AI might be able to provide that solution one day. If it's, I'm an individual and I want to use this to expand my horizons or to do better at my job or to flourish as a human being, that's a different problem that the AI is being, I'm getting to choose that, right? I think about that there are really three schools. There are three groups of people in my world, like in sort of AI scholarship. One are sort of what you might want to call the techno-optimists, right? The evangelists. The people who are like, AI is going to solve every problem out there. There's a guy, the CEO of a company called Anthropic, who's one of like the big technology companies, and he wrote a manifesto a few months ago that's like about, AI is going to solve in 5 years, like it's going to cure all these diseases, and it's going to do all these amazing things. On the whole other side of the refusalists, right? The people who are like, this is awful, it's destructive of humanity, and we need to destroy it, and it's all hype, right? So any possible way that you can criticize it, they'll find a way to criticize it. I think I'm in the middle position that says there's a lot of good that can come from this technology, and we're not going to be able to sort of stop it, right? Because there's too much money behind it. There are too many companies doing it. There's too many platforms that are creating different AI models. And so what we need to figure out how to do is how does AI become something that enhances us and doesn't diminish us? And I do worry about that. And for what I do as an academic and for journalism, that like, does AI put more content out there? I think we're in a world where we're information rich and material poor, right? We have inequality, we have scarcity, but we have information abundance, right? There's too much information out there. AI makes it a lot easier to put not good information, right? Here's where the good information is going to come from, right? But there's slop, they call it slop, right? There's a lot more, AI is going to make it easier to put a lot more information out there. But when people are information rich and resource scarce, that makes them anxious. That makes them scared. Scared, anxious people are not good citizens. They don't make good decisions. So that's one of the things that I worry about with the way that AI is being deployed right now, so.
Okay, well, thank you for you guys' thoughts, and now we can open it up. I'm curious if you think we're at the point, kind of when the internet came on the scene and news organizations were giving the content for free, right? And that really destroyed the business model for the news business, really. I kind of wonder if this is just another inflection point similar to that, where it would change the industry. Just any one of you who would like to take it.
I'll start. I think AI ultimately will change a lot of things, if not everything. I don't think that it's something that we can really escape. But I don't know how much it can change the industry, because to what David said, there are things that you have to do in journalism that just have to be done by human beings. I too don't see AI making calls and cultivating sources and finding information the way that we can when we're actually on a call and talking to someone in person. I mean, that's how we find the characters that we use in stories. That's how we find a lot of the experts we use. I mean, for every story I do, I probably talk to close to half a dozen, if not more, experts before determining who we're going to use and which information needs to be culled together for that piece. So I feel like there is a limit as to how far it can go in our business, in the news business, because I just don't think you can get it all from a computer.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it would be the opposite of what happened because of the internet. I think the economics of AI will save a lot of media companies that otherwise would have been in grave danger, because the unit economics of producing news will come way down. You will need a lot, or doing television, you'll need a lot fewer bodies to get the same output. It'll make your distribution more efficient. You'll be able to zero in to exactly the kind of reader you're trying to reach. Same thing that's happening in advertising. It'll just help you find your audience better, and that'll be good for media companies. And then to Jessica's point, go back, think about how many stories you read in the paper that quote sources, right? Everybody's sources say, according to people familiar with the situation, all that language is the derivative from a conversation that two human beings had. And that is, ChatGPT is just not going to do that. So there is a firewall, I think, because of the human interaction that journalism necessitates. I do think, and I mentioned PR earlier, I was talking to a PR executive a couple weeks ago who's using Copilot to, for example, he works with companies, and they'll ask ChatGPT or Copilot, let's draw me a scenario where the New York Times finds out about some negative news we have. We haven't told anyone yet. But do a story written in the Times style. You can even say written in the style of Andrew Ross Sorkin, one of the Times reporters, that he gets this story. What would it look like? So you can almost like time travel ahead to where your news gets leaked against your will, and then start reverse engineering your response. So I actually think it'll be, that's sadly going to be great for the PR industry. But I think, as I said earlier, the mechanics of AI will insulate media in ways that the advent of the internet wasn't able to do.
Right.
Can I add one
Yeah,
thing?
go ahead.
To Carl's point, sources say, and people familiar with the situation, I mean, you have to think about some of the biggest news stories of our time are a whistleblower or someone who works in a company or an organization or in DC, and someone is able to cultivate that person as a source, and they tell them something that nobody else knows. I mean, the whole Me Too, that all started because people were talking, and so you're never going to get that from AI. So you do always need humans in the newsroom.
Do you think it's going to make journalists a little bit lazier, because they might say, especially young journalists, like I was going to say, my daughter's a recent graduate, she uses AI all the time to do her work, and to try to get original content and story ideas. Rather than talking from people, we get a little lazy, and we might ask ChatGPT or one of the other platforms, give me 5 story angles or ideas on X topic that, my editor or producer just told me to work on.
Yes. I think yes. I do. I think yes. I think, there are times I've been in the business for a long time, and I sit in the newsroom, and there are a lot of younger people who are in the newsroom, and they're trying to do everything by email or reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and sometimes we're like, just pick up the phone and call someone, you know, because it can take so long to hear back from people. You don't know where they are during the day. So I think the short answer is yes, but I also think that people who are working in newsrooms with seasoned professionals who have been in the business for a while and know how it works, hopefully will be guided into the standards of journalism that we use and learn better ways to do it and not just solely rely on AI.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jose, because since you've done a lot of research in this area, if you want to talk about that and the algorithms and how they influence us.
Yeah, well, so actually what I was thinking, I wanted to go back to something that David had said about this first 5 years. And I've been in enough rooms with enough people who are building these, you know, LLMs, that one of the ways that they sell it is that it's going to reduce drudgery. Right, that, you know, you won't have to pick up the phone because you'll just be able to, like, you know, do this much faster without having to, you know, go to do the thing, the part of the job that people don't want to do, right? And I was in one conference where somebody, and I can't attribute, but they brought up a point to one of these executives or one of these designers, and they said, you know, the way Miles Davis got great at the trumpet was by just practicing the scales for 8 hours a day, right? You become a virtuoso by doing the drudgery, right? You became a great writer by doing, you know, by doing the drudgery in your first 5 years. And so I do think that is a challenge for, you know, a generation coming up is that these tools are being sold as a way to go around the drudgery, to avoid the drudgery. And so how do we become virtuoso, or how do we become proficient or expert at things without going, you know, without doing the 2-a-days if you're a football fan, or without doing, you know, without training, you know? So that's a challenge. Yeah.
Something I would add to that is those first 5 years were valuable not only from a standpoint of getting better at my craft, but it was also valuable because I made money doing it, and that money's gone now. I don't think that money exists anymore. I think to the point about AI as a sort of an algorithmic pursuit, right? As a writer, whenever I approach any topic, there are some things that everybody knows, and there are some things that I've only learned through reading and through conversation. So if I said the sky is blue, I don't really have to attribute that to anyone. If I said something hyper-specific about the way the atmosphere works, I might have to cite a science paper. And because I'm a human being, I know the difference, right? I know when I need to attribute. There's a sense of honor that also goes into this. I know that I couldn't just claim someone's experience as my own. When AI is being trained, I don't know that we've given it a sense of honor in that regard. So I could very easily say, write a story in the style of David W. Brown and about whatever topic's going on, and it could do a pretty passable job. I mean, I was talking to Judy earlier, and I said that AI is very good at writing very badly, but it's very bad at writing very good. But you know, even writers have like a bad first draft. But again, we know the difference between which should be cited and which shouldn't be cited. And I also sorry, let me get on my soapbox here. I guess that's the whole point of being here, right? My books went into training that algorithm. And I didn't get any money for that. My articles went into training that algorithm. And your work has gone into training that thing. Have you received any royalty checks? Do I need to send someone my address? That is outrageous. And the idea that just because Facebook decides we're going to steal your data, we can't sue Facebook. Well, why not? That's grand larceny. But we're just going to be okay with that. You know what? Let's light torches and go burn that building down. Who's with me?
You know, I also am thinking about the consumer of news, right? And how what advice would you give them? Because to what you were saying, Jessica, about the transparency is so important and critical, and the accuracy, it's trust, goes to trust. How, as anybody, as a consumer of news, how do you know what to trust? How do you know where those sources are? Can you guys talk about that and advice that you'd give to consumers? And where do you see your news organizations going regarding preserving that integrity and trust and transparency?
Yeah, this is a huge topic, and to David's point about sort of ownership and compensation, that's a conversation that's going on in every artistic industry, in Hollywood, anyone who's got a public face, what do I own, what don't I own? It's going to get monetized by someone, and how much control do you have over that? I do think that there'll be, it's funny, like in graphic design, we have the head of Adobe on the show sometimes, and there's been some discussion about, could you issue like a watermark of sorts on content that would say, it would be like a label that said this is non-AI generated. The same thing will happen in the arts. I don't know, I'm not sure what that does. Probably can't hurt to establish some kind of provenance of human-generated material. That's one possible solution, but we're so far from agreeing on, and that's the other part. Even if you agree on a standard, you know how many governments around the world are going to be doing this in their own way? 100, 200 different potential policies on safety, on speed, on rights, privacy. So we could talk about how we're going to do it, but that doesn't mean what France is going to do is the same thing.
Yeah.
I did a classroom visit yesterday for a communications class, and I was talking to them about different news sources and how to know who to trust. And the problem is that there is such an abundance of places to go for news, and we know that obviously our younger generation is looking at TikTok and looking at Instagram and social media to get their news. And I was saying, like, when I read a story about something that happened in the news today, I look at the same story on different websites and in different places because I'm getting different details and different factoids from different places. I don't think that there's one blanket statement of like, this is the news organization you can trust. I know a lot of people think that we at NBC are hacks, and that Fox is the only place to go. I think that you have to just know, hopefully you're informed enough to know enough about the source of where you're getting your news. And don't just be completely blindsided or, put your blinders on and think that one source is the only source. You have to know all news organizations have different talent, different sources where they're getting information. And I just think it's really important to recognize and kind of do your own research into how accurate are the stories that you're reading. Is that what you're seeing mostly everywhere? If you see one part or one angle of a story that's totally out of left field and nobody else is reporting that and other people are disputing that, I think that tells you something.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, Jose, you look like you want to say something.
So Candace had asked me about algorithms before, and I'm going to very gently promote a book that's coming out. But part of what I wrote about is that we are, all of us are subject to an algorithmic culture that's rooted in recommendation algorithms that determine what it is we like, because that's going to keep us engaged, that's going to keep us on the platform. And so the more we engage with entities that try to figure out what we like, the more we start developing that mindset ourselves. So we become algorithmic in the way that we think, meaning that, we only go to this news source because this news source gives me things I like, right? We only watch these kind of movies. We only listen to this kind of music. There's a really great book by a journalist, Kyle Chakia, who talks about algorithms, and he says, you go to anywhere in the world and you're going to find a coffee shop that pretty much looks like a U.S. coffee shop, like a Starbucks, like high ceilings, exposed, ductwork, big open floor plan. Because why? Because anytime an American tourist goes to some place and they want to find a coffee shop, they'll go on Yelp, and Yelp will rank the Starbucks-style coffee shop at the top of the ratings. And so what does that do? That creates like a sameness, an architectural sameness, right? Any musician who wants to figure out how to game the algorithm knows that they have to sort of cut down to chord changes and sort of moderate or, make modal the kind of music that they're creating. So artists are even trying to figure out how to appeal to the middle in some ways, right? And so that sort of algorithmatization of our own minds, right? It's something that I think makes it difficult to do what we all should be doing, right? And like, go to multiple news sources. We're all trying to train. What we as professors are trying to train our students, our undergraduates to do, right, is to be critical, right? But we're fighting against a culture that makes it hard to be critical. It makes it hard because you don't have to, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be vetted, right? One of my favorite philosophers, Karl Popper, talks about the hallmark of a liberal democracy is conjecture and refutation. I offer my ideas about how the world works out to you all, to others, and others challenge it. And then I take that challenge in, and I absorb it, and I determine whether or not that refutation is accurate, and I modify my conjecture. And then I go back and I do it again, right? But it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be wrong. Righteousness feels good, right? You know, and so I think our society, we're falling into those habits, and those aren't good democratic habits. So, all right, so there's the gentle book.
Yeah, there's a great, you've probably forgotten more about algorithms than I'll ever know, but I do know that if you listen to Spotify, right, and if you listen to a Start Radio, right, it'll give you, I forget what the acronym is, but it'll give you just the right amount of songs it thinks you already know and love, and then a couple songs that are new that it thinks you might like. But it's not all favorite songs, and it's not all new songs, and that formula, in effect, silos us off. Same with Netflix and recommended for you. The way they, remember, a new show will start just as soon as the old one's ending. And in a sense, it's walling us off from getting variety in our lives, politically, artistically.
Right. I mean, basically, we're being programmed, right? That's what it sounds like. So what's the solution? I mean, Carl, you mentioned the governance issue. I'm just wondering, Jose, because you've talked to these companies, like, and I would like to get a read kind of from all of you, like, where do you see this going? Especially in the field of journalism, like 3-5 years from now, like, if you can just imagine, what do you practically think might be happening 3 to 5 years from now?
Well, I think media organizations are being trained to specialize. If you look at the rise of, take a handful of examples. Axios, we were just talking about, Politico, Semaphore, The New Yorker is a good example, where they're just doubling down on their own brand, their own specialty, their own strengths. And the notion of sort of mass media, the nightly news, the evening news, the morning shows, where it's sort of, as we said, more variety, that kind of gets suppressed. Same with, like, I'm doing a panel in the morning about internships in like young journalism. It used to be you'd go and you'd cover cops, and then you'd cover schools, and you'd cover City Hall, and you'd be a great generalist, and then one day you'd become, you'd pick your beat, what you want to cover. Now, the program is you specialize from the get-go, and you get really good at one thing. I'm going to cover climate. And then you can establish a Substack audience, and you can have a podcast following, but there's no more of the generalization that most journalists of our generation started out with.
Yeah, gosh.
Jose?
That's the $6 million question, right? Like, how do you, mindfulness, right? Knowing when you're too, I mean, first of all, like on a global scale, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how you turn the ship around, right? But I think on an individual level, it's sort of awareness that you're too dependent on the algorithm. It goes back to old school critical thinking, having an awareness of yourself, mindfulness, for the things that algorithms and our social media culture don't give us: time, reflection, space for contemplation, taking a walk without taking the earbuds out and just taking a walk. And one of the things, and this goes before AI and algorithms, one of the big issues of the last decade and a half is sort of our reliance on the crowd. I mean, I've been doing this. I'm an old timer now. I've been doing this for a while, and one of the things that the internet and platforms allowed was that instead of relying on the curator, the expert, the food critic, right, or the music critic, we rely on the crowd. On Yelp or on whatever, right, Spotify. Rotten Tomatoes, right. So, that was an industry that isn't anywhere near as prominent as it used to be. So taking that step back and sort of weaning ourselves off, or, I mean, look, sometimes I just want to listen to things I like, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with just like going back to the oldies, but reflecting on like, man, when was the last time I actually just stepped outside of my recommendation algorithm and just did something, and just listen to something or watch something or read something or engage with something that is completely out of my comfort zone, right? It's a little bit like exercise, right? Like stretching yourself, like, pushing for that last half mile or whatever, right? I think it's the same principle. Like, we have to be mindful of, we have to be cognizant of it, and intentionally stretch ourselves, right? So.
Yeah, that is great advice. Jessica, would love your thoughts, and then David.
Yeah, I think in the next several years, for what happens in the newsroom, the kind of job that I do, I think that beyond transcription, it might be able to help if I've written the script, maybe I can create a rough cut of the edit somehow before actually going to the editor to have it done. I think that there are going to be different ways that it can be used that way. I think that we at NBC News are also putting a lot of time and energy into our digital platform. So many of the stories that I do on Nightly News and on the Today Show have an accompanying article online. So for someone who doesn't watch the Today Show but maybe heard about or a certain kind of a story, you can go and basically see it online anyway. And I think that the legacy media, it is going to be changing over time, but I think that we're still going to be producing content, and it'll just be accessible to people in a different way. But one other thing I just want to add off of what Jose just said is the idea that, I don't remember exactly what you said I don't remember what you said, but it made me think about the risk of people getting their news from influencers. And I think that that's just a huge challenge right now for those of us who are in the legitimate media versus someone out there who's just, giving their opinion on something. And obviously that's happening with products, and, companies are paying these influencers to be promoting their products, and because their followers see them and like them and think that they could be friends with them in real life, they're trusting their opinions. But the problem is that that's happening across the board with news stories as well. And I think that that's something that we have to be really careful about and aware of, so that people really aren't just, well, this person said, that this is what's happening, and I like, the way she dresses, and so therefore I'm going to trust her opinion. I think that really is a big challenge.
Wow.
To add what Jessica's saying, something to consider going forward, AI companies are going to continue to have to feed the algorithm or the database more information. And as with the rise of the influencer, that information, that news source is going to become incorporated in this database with the same legitimacy as the New York Times or NBC News or CNBC or Fox or whatever. And at that point, we're going to see sort of I think, a coarsening of discourse or a lowering of the intellectual threshold. Not that there aren't a great many highly intelligent and insightful influencers, but for sure there are a lot of pretty bad ones too. I don't know how these companies are going to give weight to the information fed into these systems, and I imagine that that's probably a conversation that they're having as well. But something I think it was Carl who was saying earlier, that because every country is basically developing their own AI infrastructure. China has their own AI algorithms and software. Are they going to give the same weight to who is valuable as we are? Why does that matter? Because at a certain point, I'm not convinced that the consumer is going to know who owns what, right? We know, generally speaking, who the big media companies are right now, but, I mean, who owns Axios? Does anyone know? We probably should. I mean, we know who they are. But if you're not like a hyper-savvy media consumer, you could very easily fall prey to any fly-by-night media company that has a legitimate website, I think. I don't know.
Well, this is why TikTok is an enormous story.
Right.
I mean, for two reasons. One, it's that getting news from influencers on TikTok is already happening at scale, and the foreign ownership side is creating huge policy challenges for the last administration and this one. So I think that ship has sailed, but we can still talk about it.
And I think the latest Pew study showed that 27% of Americans were getting their news from TikTok. Yeah. Basically, I've directed my team, we have to have a TikTok channel. So we're pushing out our content on TikTok.
I mean, look, every news organization has a social media presence, right? And then there's Mo News, which is all on Instagram, and he used to run CBS Evening News, and he's a legitimate journalist. So I think that there is factual and accurate information that exists out there on social media. I think you just have to, where did they come from? What's their background? Where are you getting it from?
Yeah, and that goes to media literacy. Carl, you talked about the segmentation and the specialization. The same thing is happening on the PR marketing side. We're getting more and more specialized, more and more targeted content to individuals. We even use AI to test personas when we want to message test for ad campaigns. Yeah. So that's just a tool how it's being used on the other side, because organizations are content creators too, really. Well, now I think we have time to open it up for questions. If you do have a question, raise your hand. We have the producers in the back, raise your hand. They'll give you a pencil and a card. And so we'd love to get your thoughts in. So, okay. Oh, this is from a student, yay. How does this conversation change if it is being held in China or Russia? The AI there would certainly be, would it be friendlier? Question mark.
Well, I mean, the rules are completely different in those countries. It's funny, we have a correspondent in Beijing whom we sometimes check in with on our morning show. And there'll be times where, and she can say anything she wants. She doesn't have like a minder watching her during her live shot. But depending on what she says, our signal in China will go black. I've been in Beijing at the Park Hyatt watching our own air, CNBC, in Beijing, and I'll be watching something, they'll be discussing something on the show, and the screen will just go black. And then you wait, 90 seconds, and then it'll come back. So, I mean, that's not hyperbole. That actually happens every day. It's media, control in a country with state-owned media. So it's like being on the moon. It's just there's a completely different way of life.
I think something worth considering, I would just add to that, it only occurs to me how horrifying it is that we can also weaponize AI to do that very thing. And can anyone look at the last couple of months and say, oh, we would never do that here? I don't think so.
That's right. It's a way to control, a tool to control.
We can censor at scale now. It's going to be great.
Another question is, can you address the lawsuits by the New York Times and others how they were trained, they use the Times articles to train. You were talking to train the LLMs. You were referencing this before, David, too, just about how articles are, legit news source articles are being scraped, used for databases, so AI companies can make money, essentially.
I mean, I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think that if we go into this conversation just saying, well, who's going to stop them, then no one's going to stop them. They're going to keep doing it. At some point, either the law has to catch up to them, or that's really the only option. The law has to catch up to them. And again, exactly what Carl was saying, that those laws won't apply once you leave our borders. So it's hard not to feel the more I talk, the worse I feel. So I'm going to need therapy after this if there is.
So David, not to add to your pessimism, but so the New York Times is suing OpenAI, and there was, I think it was the New York Times or somebody actually created a database that revealed whether or not your book or if you had written anything had been used in OpenAI's training data. So I put my book in, oh yeah, look, I train it. But DeepSeek, so as a Chinese company, basically took OpenAI's data and used it, right, and fine-tuned its model on OpenAI. So in some ways, the horse is out of the barn, right? In terms of, because what are we going to do in terms of DeepSeek, or in terms of, I guess we could ban it in the United States, but that would still, stop it from other places anyway. So,
thanks. You didn't have.
In your opinion, what do you think are some important AI literacies that the university should be recommending for journalism students?
I think the best advice I've gotten in the last few months has been, if you're going to do a Google search, do a ChatGPT search instead. Start training yourselves how to prompt, because that's going to really make a huge difference in the results you get. I think Google's under enormous pressure. We talk about the stocks, which all stocks are down, but Alphabet, Google, has lost a lot of market share to ChatGPT. No one says that they Gemini'd their paper, which is Google's product. They all say, I ChatGPT'd my paper. And then once ad dollars, I mean, if ChatGPT were to launch a true ad-based model, you'll see money migrate. So there's a lot of existential gloom about traditional Google search. But I would say just get used to it. I mean, whether or not you're a fan of it or not, you should be literate in it. And the more you prompt it, the better you'll get at asking it the right kinds of questions.
Right. Yeah, we're also even getting training here, my writers, how to write the prompts, you know, and using the agents. How do younger generations navigate the world of social media, which is more prominent today with the usage of AI? This might be a Jose question. What advice do you have for us for social media?
Oh man, I think I'm flummoxed with that one. Well, like I mean, we've talked a lot about the negatives of AI and social media, but there are a lot of positives. Even TikTok or Instagram, there's a lot of creative, funny, interesting, informative material that's going on there. And I think I'm always going to come back to the same answer with a lot of this. It's human relationships. If you have kids, if you have grandkids, if you have nieces and uncles, like be in their lives and be curious. And I have a 20-year-old, right? And so part of raising that child was pretending to be interested in stuff that I had no interest in. I hope they don't watch. Sorry, Jasper. But like being interested in their lives, and some of the things that they were interested in, I wound up getting interested in, right? But I still think it all comes down to human connection. I think the only things that saves us is relationships, right? Connection. That's right. Human connection, and critical thinking. And like the thing that Carl said about being able to write a good prompt. You need to be a good thinker. You need to be what we're trying to do in colleges, what CU tries to do. If you're going to write a good prompt, you need to know your stuff, right? So at least that's the way I try to sell it to my students is like ChatGPT actually raises the bar on you, right? Because now if you think you're going to get a job doing, like banal, like pencil pushing, like work, that brainless work, you're not going to be able to do, the AI is going to do the brainless work. If I assign an essay and it sounds like ChatGPT, I say, I can't tell that you ChatGPT this, to your point, not Gemini this. But it sounds like you did. And if you sound like a robot's going to replace you, right? So it is an advertisement for what we do in colleges and universities, particularly the humanities, right? Like to learn how to think, so.
Oh, this is another one for you, Jose. Can you explain an example of how the algorithm is worked in politics?
Oh, Lord.
You wrote a whole book
Yeah, this is
about
my
it.
bugaboo, right? How the algorithm has worked in politics. Look, one of the things, and so what I was talking about in terms of like the restaurants or coffee shops all over the world looking identical, a lot of same thing you have to do with music is you have to figure out how to get it to how to conform to the algorithm. Is with ideas, right? And when ideas become brands, that's problematic because an idea is different than a brand. An idea, and I talked about conjecture and refutation before. If I offer an idea in a public sphere, in a liberal democratic society, I'm offering it knowing that I might be wrong, and I'm offering it for conjecture and refutation. A brand gets punished if they deviate. You imagine your favorite left-wing or right-wing influencer going on TikTok or going on Instagram and saying, you know what, I was wrong. I actually think the other side has a point. You never hear that, right? Because you would lose audience share. You'd get punished for evolving as a brand in a way that it's, I mean, for many things in market capitalism, brands are great, right? But for ideas, I think that there are some issues with treating political ideas like brands. And I think a lot of where people get their news are brands. They're ideological brands in ways that I think diminish us and truncate us, and you can read about it in my book, which I'm not supposed to.
Okay, this is a comment and then a question. It seems that the modern media is inadequate, too slow, too echo-chambered, too biased, untrustworthy to be the Walter Cronkite of our flood zone era. Could AI be suitable in a real-time fact-checking? Is that a way to have it as a possible tool?
Maybe. So, I'm sorry, did I cut?
No, you can.
Well, I'll real quick and I'll hand it over. There's a professor at Duke, a guy named Chris Bale, a sociologist, and he and his team have done this really interesting work where they're using AI as a fact checker to correct misinformation or extreme views, and they're finding that there is some, that a person will trust an AI more because of our polarized environment. That they might trust an AI more than they would trust a news source that they think is fake news, right? So there is some promising work in that area. Time will tell, though.
I was going to say, I don't know how, when it will come a time where it can fact check in real time. The whole fake news issue, I mean, the struggle is real. Walking around saying that I work for NBC News used to be something that, journalists could be really proud of. And nowadays, sometimes people are like, oh, the legacy media, all of the adjectives you just put on the card. I think that, I know for a fact, we have a call every morning. It goes basically around the world in a half an hour. It hits every bureau and talks about all the headlines of the day. And we are very careful about our guidance in terms of what we can report, what we can say, whether or not we have enough sources. We'll talk about things will be spoken about on the call where they will say this is not reportable yet. So I think that that's a very blanket statement to say that all of the media is inaccurate and disingenuous. I don't agree with that, but I think that there are outlets that are less accurate than others, and I think that we have a responsibility as citizens to know where our news is coming from and know the history of those organizations to make educated decisions as to who we're going to listen to, when and why, and make sure that we know where it's all coming from. There was a story, I don't know who watches the Today Show, but there was a story last week or the week before Vicki Wynn, our chief consumer investigative correspondent, did on deep fakes. And she pulled stuff out that was of Al Roker promoting products, and none of it was true. It looked like him, it sounded like him. I think that even back to how our younger generation navigates social media, there is stuff out there that is literally created out of thin air, and we have to educate our younger population to have at least a small dose of skepticism. I am the eternal optimist and positive about everything, and I don't want my kids to grow up as total pessimists. But I think that we have to be realists about our sources of news.
Right.
One thing I would add to that is that the process of reporting out a story is slow and it's messy. Like you can talk to 5 different people who saw the same event and you will get 5 different accounts. And not just about something that they saw 5 seconds in their life, but you can talk to people whose core stories that are central to their identity. And if you start fact-checking these stories, this has happened to me multiple times, these things that are near and dear to their hearts didn't actually happen. They don't realize that, but that's just the way memory works. We fill in the blanks. We don't remember everything. We are not hard drives. I think AI is going to get super fast, and it's great, and it's just going to be wrong very fast. But when news is breaking, how am I to know the difference between its confident inaccuracies versus a human being's slightly slower and slightly less confident accuracies?
Can you tell them a little bit about what it's like dealing with the New Yorker copy desk?
Oh God, so every story in the New Yorker is rigorously fact checked. One example, I wrote a piece for the magazine a year ago, and I mentioned that my dad worked on the Mississippi River. He was a tugboat pilot. And like I know this to be true, right? I mean, this is my whole life. And the fact checker was like, well, I need to talk to your dad to verify that. And they did, which was deeply weird. But yeah, it's one proceeds cautiously when writing.
Yeah, I don't know how we would get that level of fact checking from AI. It's not out there. There's some practical questions. Jose, I'm wondering if you can answer. People are asking for tactics that they could use basically to have the algorithm, work for us, so that they're not being tracked, or they're able to clear their history. Essentially, can you turn it off so it's not feeding you the content that it thinks that you want?
It depends on the platform and depends on the service. Some are much easier to do than others, but there is always the option of ignoring, the algorithm and going outside of it. And so, it depends on what you're talking about. If it's a film, there's still the Village Voice does a great critics, circle, critics section, and there are many publications where they're still film critics, they're still food critics, they're still music critics. I mean, there's still friends, we all still have friends, right? And so we can talk to other humans and ask them, hey, what movie have you seen lately, right? So I mean, we don't have to depend on the algorithm, right? I mean, there's no law yet that we have to depend on it. So yeah, I mean, I think my advice is to not worry so much about. I mean, one thing you can do is if you want to use curation, like algorithmic curation, is to just follow things and be kind of an omnivore about what you like and what you follow, and then you'll confuse the algorithm. So the book, you must become an algorithmic problem, and so become an algorithmic problem. Make the algorithm, confuse the algorithm, just for fun. I think it's fun.
Next question is, what do you think are the large-scale implications concerning misinformation in AI and content?
Well, I think it seems weird to us because we're the last generation to remember normal information. But I think young people, this is like the way it is, and it always has been their entire lives. Their politics, their media. So I don't know. I guess I'm not as pessimistic because I think they'll have grown up with that natural pessimism from the beginning. It might make it an easier way, or it might be easier for them to adjust to this thing that happened in the middle of our lives and was so jarring. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think the worst case scenario is that lives can be ruined. I mean, people who follow the news may remember a story from the last couple of weeks about a college student at Ole Miss who a terrible rumor was spread around about her, and shameless plug, NBC got the exclusive with her.
The Times broke it, though.
This is true. But, I mean, that's the worst case scenario, is that misinformation will be spread and it will become so pervasive in certain circumstances that people will not be able to recover from it. And I think that's really scary.
Yeah.
I think look, Michelin star restaurants don't become chain restaurants, right? Because it requires a certain mindset to go into one, and of course it requires a certain amount of money. But Taco Bell is a fine chain restaurant, right? And I think we're going to see the exact same thing, or we are seeing the exact same thing with the proliferation of AI as a quote unquote reputable source. I think that people are going to trend toward it. And look, like when news is breaking, it's very exciting to me. Like I want to know what's happening, and whoever has the next update in Google News, like I'm very thrilled to read that story because now I know a little bit more than, like on the night of a presidential election, who's not reloading their browser constantly because we want to know just one more thing. Once AI is generating that stuff at a rapid velocity, I think, I'm not too worried about the big stories over long periods of time, but I am worried about the small stories in short amounts of time. I think it could skew things very hard one way or the other. I guess we'll see. I mean, I'll see you all in the apocalypse.
Let's say, what about you? What do you see as the large-scale implications?
Of misinformation?
No, of AI on, misinformation for.
Well, we mentioned
Opposite.
stories with sources, and you're right, the craving for breaking news. I think it'll add even heightened importance to sources, which human interaction, right? People talking to other people. And I think it'll actually put a huge emphasis on booking. Like you want to get the interview, right? That's not AIable. It's an interview, and you already see it. You see, it's been years in the making in television, but magazines, newspapers, not analysis, not rumor, but we managed to get this person to talk on the record, and that'll be that's something that tech can't corrupt. That'll be even more important for journalists to book the big guest.
Right, that makes sense. Jose, did you have anything to add for that question?
I mean, being comfortable, customization. What did AI and what have algorithms and social media done for us? It's allowed us to customize our lives, our epistemology, the way we see the world, right? It makes it comfortable. And we know and maybe this is a hopeful sign, is like we know in other aspects of life that if we just eat comfort food, it's probably not good for our health, right? If we just sit on the couch all day, that's probably not good for our health. And so we've had public health campaigns, and I think we are probably a healthier society. Most people know that, you can't eat cheeseburgers every day and be healthy, So, I mean, we adjust, we adapt. And so I think maybe, again, for me, it always comes back to relationship and community and stretching and doing the uncomfortable thing and staying in conversation with people that, like those relatives that, that you had a fight with about politics over Thanksgiving. It's like just, not giving in to the tendency that these platforms have to allow you to customize your life, your world. Right, because I think at the end of the day, that is harmful for us the way that eating comfort food is harmful for us if we do it all the time, right? So.
Yeah. Last question. What advice do you have for young journalists starting out in the field, especially this in the environment where, AI is a tool, probably like the internet was a tool for us, Gen Xers. What advice would you give a budding journalist?
I think I would say I would overemphasize the importance of research and accuracy and being factually correct, because the reason that so many people are disappointed with the media these days is because it's coming from every direction and it's just not always factual and accurate. So I think we have to be able to teach young journalists the skills from back in the day to make sure that they can grow up to be respectable journalists.
Great. David?
Learn to be an automobile mechanic.
Have a plan B?
Yeah.
Plan B, strong plan.
Medical school is very useful. No, I probably, and I don't know this to be true, but I think journalism school will probably become more important than it was, or than it maybe historically has been, simply because you're going to learn to pick up a telephone, which is a very hard thing to do. Like, it's a little bit weird and intimidating to just call someone you've never spoken with in your entire life. Probably, I personally would encourage a young journalist to read, say, journalism from the 1970s, sort of that Tom Wolfe era, where writers were really cultivating very strong narrative voices, writing stories in ways that they hadn't been written before, making your work algorithm-proof, right? In a weird way, it would be very hard to write a Tom Wolfe story today if you weren't Tom Wolfe. And I think even ChatGPT would probably have a hard time with it. So differentiating yourself, I hate the idea that the word brand, your brand, I would like to think that we're aspiring to loftier things, but there probably is some utility in doing that. And when I get off the stage, I'm going to work on that immediately.
Carl?
I would say to a young journalist, there is no greater job. There is nothing like being able to pick up the phone talk to a total stranger and say, I don't know anything about aerospace, making planes, being in a war, I mean, you name it, being a fireman. Tell me, teach me, show me, take me with you, and show me what it's like to do X. And that you have complete license to do that every day. It's the most amazing thing. You're not being asked to sell someone on something, really. You're not trying to please a client. You're really not trying to make your numbers. Let ad sales worry about that, right? You're trying to make a great story. It's the best job in the world. I would say prepare to be hated. It's just a big part of the job is just to have a tough skin, take the criticism, learn from it, and move on. Find a specialty, as we said earlier. That's something that you love, that you maybe could cover for your whole career, and remember that the world needs you. For the reason we're doing this panel is because the world's going to need human beings to do this job.
Yeah, thank you. There was just a few themes that I heard, and I wanted to thank you for all of your great discussion. Media literacy, critical thinking, be a algorithmic problem, and most importantly, human connection, which we all need over AI. So thank you, panelists.